I'm Lisa Cave. I teach music entrepreneurship at Capital University, and I'm so excited to be talking today to a multifaceted music entrepreneur. He is a rapper, he's a producer, he's a podcaster, he's a beat maker, he's an author. Blueprints. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you. You've had such a diverse career, and I want to touch a little bit on everything that you've done. But
Mhm.
let's start at the beginning. How did your music career start?
Uh, my music career probably started in college, I would say. Um, I mean, I had been exposed to music a lot growing up just through church.
Yeah.
So in church, we had bands and I learned music there by ear, kind of. I never learned to read music, but I was always kind of familiar with music there, singing and playing in church. But then I kind of left it alone until I got to college. And in college, I discovered DJing. And there was a kid on campus who had like a set of turntables that he would bring out to all the events. And this is in Springfield, Ohio. And he was from like Cali. And he was like a real like surfer Cali dude. He'd be like,
Yeah.
bro, you got to come spin with me. And I didn't understand the vernacular or the slang or anything. And he was just so ahead of his time. And he was like, yo, I work at the radio station. Because every time he spin, I'd just be sitting there watching. He's like, come to the radio station. We have meetings once a month and you should get a show and get involved if you like music like that and you can learn use a turntable. So I took his word for it. I started going to the radio station. I got a radio show, um, which kind of led me to discover records. Because back then, if you did college radio, they all had these amazing libraries of records. They would be getting sent for 40, 50 years. And so going in there, I started discovering jazz records, old rock records, and I started kind of putting together a little crate. And I said, okay, well, one day, if I ever learn how to make beats, these records are going to be the first 10, 20 records I sample. And so I got a job at the radio station. It was called the Remote Crew. And the Remote Crew, which was basically this guy's job. He's like, I'm graduating. He was a few years ahead of me. He said, you should apply for this job that I got. I said, what's the job? He said, well, you basically take DJ equipment out to every event. You get paid to do it. And then they pay you to DJ and DJ parties too. And I said, well, how much is it? He said, oh, it's like $45 an hour. And in college, that was a lot of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
I'm like,
sure.
I'm like, so if I DJ a party from 8 to 1 o'clock in the morning, I get paid $45. He said, yeah. And you get
Right.
paid an hour to set up and an hour to break down.
And you
So
get the experience and it's
yeah,
fun. So yeah.
yeah. So I started doing that. And then I started getting hired for genres I knew nothing about. So I would just call up people who had shows in those genres and I would just partner up with them. So I was like, hey, I got to offer to DJ this gig this Saturday and they want this kind of music played. You want to split the money with me? Because I don't really know the music that well. And they'd be like, cool. So every other weekend I was doing that. It was like the best job I had. But that kind of led me to learning how to DJ. I was DJing all the biggest parties on campus. I took the turntables home in the summer since the schools closed down. They allowed me to bring the turntables home, and that's when I really started learning how to DJ and cut and scratch mix. And it kind of led me to beat making, which was kind of natural because it was like, okay, you're learning about records. Now you're learning about DJing, and you're listening to these old records where these samples come from that people are using.
Mhm.
And so my mind was like, okay, I think I might be able to make beats. So I got a little drum machine, and we had like a little pause karaoke double take deck back then. This was when that was a lot of people were using those instead of 4 tracks before you got a 4 track. And so I started making these little pause mixtapes. And then I had friends who were rhyming and freestyling, and I had never really cared about rap like that, but they were so into like rhyming. They were writing rhymes and rapping all the time. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna learn how to make beats and DJ. And that was kind of my interest into it, was just making beats for my crew. And I would rhyme sometimes, but I never took it that seriously, not as serious as them. And that was kind of how I got started into the craft. And my I got my first sampler my senior year in college, and that's when I really got into the craft of beat making. When I got that machine, I just didn't leave the house for like a month straight, and I just would make beats for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And those beats ended up being the first beats on the first release we put out like a year or two later.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a great evolution of, going from learning from some of, the DJ experience, learning from the masters from that and getting, you know, knowledge from so many different people. I love that you had people that were coming in from different genres to help you with different things. That's the fastest way to learn anything is just to ask and to learn from somebody that's already doing it. And that really cuts out a lot of time and makes it easier for you and more accessible for you. and also more fun to just really have somebody that you're working alongside and working it out together and just,
Absolutely.
exploring that. I think it's fun to just, try it. And there are no rules to this. You just try it and see what happens. And, just being able to make beats at your house and at home and on your own timeline and trial and error is a great way to learn how to figure out how to do that stuff. So I think being self-taught creates your sound, a really unique sound that is entirely yours because of the process that you've gone through to learn that.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And I've always had people who were into different stuff, and I would just kind of be a sponge, like the whole DJing thing. I didn't know anybody DJing growing up. I literally saw 1,200 turntables for the first time on a college campus, and I was just mesmerized. Like, and then dude saw my interest. He kind of took me under wing. I had friends that I met through the hip hop scene in Columbus, and they were making beats ahead of me, and they would let me come over their house sometimes, and I would just watch them make beats.
Yeah.
They never really taught me like, okay, this is how you do it, but just watching them and how serious they were about the craft. Same thing. I had friends who were far superior record collectors than I will ever be, and they would kind of teach me about records along the way. So I've always had people who were deeper into certain aspects than me, and I just try to learn as much as possible from all of
And
them.
I think that's so exciting too, is like when you get introduced to a new artist or a new record or somebody really obscure and there's like a really, really deep cut and you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever heard. And how can I use that? How can I manipulate that into something new so that to reshare that? I think the greatest thing about beat making and about producing this kind of music, it is still revisiting this really great music and sharing it with a new audience. It's so competitive in the music industry that a lot of artists that are just incredible never really get their due, never really get the spotlight that they deserve. And things like what you do breathe new life into that music and create a new audience for people where they get to discover something that they missed entirely the first time or that was, 40 years before they were born.
Yeah, absolutely. And not growing up, only music that we played in my house was R&B and gospel.
Hmm.
My parents didn't listen to any jazz.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't for hip hop, I never would have heard any jazz records. That introduced me to a whole genre and a whole lineage of artists that I never would have heard of. Rock, I never would have been exposed to rock, and now like my collection of rock and my knowledge of a lot of these bands is far more superior than like anybody from another genre because I was late to it, but I was so hungry for it because I'd never really been exposed to it growing up.
You just absorbed it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. And you've done a lot of producing too. You've worked with a whole lot of different artists. What are some of the projects that you've worked on that you've
Uh,
learned the most from, or
well,
that have been the best experiences for you?
I started out producing for, well, we started a label called Weightless. And this
Mhm.
was, and I was basically like the producer of the label. So I would produce I also ran the label. And so every artist there was myself, which was my crew, which was the Greenhouse crew. There's three of us. I produced at least five of those albums. Illogic, another Columbus artist, I produced three of his albums, his first three records. Um, Artist from Columbus named Envelope. I produced his first album. No, his second album, sorry, was Shark Bolt. Um, because we released that as well. Zero Star produced his record. Gosh, who else have I done production for? I've done production for a lot of smaller artists, um, a lot of collaborations and stuff like that. But I tend to produce. I mean, obviously, all of my solo records have been produced by me.
Right.
Um, and then I have other collaborations with other producers, and I have several like instrumental albums that I put out myself.
Yeah. And I think it's great how those relationships come about too. It's just all being a part of the scene and being open to working with other people. And I think that's really important that it's not just this solitary thing, that your music can still be yours, but it can also grow with, input and collaboration with other artists. And that can really help you grow as an artist too. And I think a lot of people don't collaborate enough. I think they
Yes.
are missing the boat there. There's so much good things that come out of collaboration, not just a new way of doing things or a different kind of sound, but also cross collaboration between your audiences too. It can be a really good marketing tool also for people to, if you're working with, Envelope and you're reaching his audience and he's reaching your
Mm-hmm.
audience, that benefits everybody.
Yeah, and one of the things that helped me with collaborating was like during the first 3 4 years of my career, I had no desire to be a solo artist, so I was just doing as many records as possible as a producer, just kind of collaborating with people. But what it taught me as a producer and as a label manager was like how to release a record, but not using myself. I was perfecting how to run promotional campaigns for artists that I was just running a label for, not
Right.
knowing that along the line, all these lessons that I'm learning from working with them, I could then apply to my solo career once I decided to have one.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to touch on that too, because that's something that I really appreciate that you do. You've taken all this knowledge that you've learned over the years and you share that with younger artists too, with emerging artists. That's a huge topic in your podcast. So you
Yes.
have a podcast, and I think it's great that you share so much of your experience there and your knowledge, because that is really the fastest way to learn anything, is to help guide people. And there's no textbook for the music industry, and it keeps changing every year anyway. So gathering insight from people that have been out there in the trenches, learning this stuff along the way and sharing those experiences. And then also I appreciate that you touch a lot on, there's some traps in the music industry. That music industry is hard. It can be
Mhm.
really, it can be mentally difficult for people, it can be physically difficult for people. You've got late nights, especially when you're an emerging artist. You're probably working a 9 to 5, and then you're working a 7 to 2 at the club to try to build your career. So that can be exhausting. And just the substance abuse and the many traps that are out that exist in the music industry. You're really upfront about that stuff, and you talk about it, and because it is something that you need to be aware of and that you need to protect yourself about, and also mental health too. So why do you talk about that stuff in
Uh,
your podcast so much? Why have you didn't need to make that a focus of so
yeah.
much of what you do, but I appreciate why you do it. But how
We
did you decide to start focusing on that?
I think it was two things. One was like seeing the types of questions I get emailed
Mhm.
by artists. Over the years, for many years, I would just get these emails like, "Hey, man, how did you guys do this? How do you navigate that? I'm in this situation. What should I do?" And I would have all these emails, and I would answer them one by one. And I was like, "Wait a minute." And I would look at all my peers, and I was like, none of my peers are talking about this. And it reminded me that like when we were coming up, everything was very secretive.
Yeah.
Like if you look at like early hip hop, guys would literally they would put covers on their record labels because
So
they
you
didn't.
didn't see it.
Yeah,
Right.
they didn't want nobody to see what they were playing.
It's just a picture.
Yeah,
Right.
just a picture. You look like, who is that? Or they would switch labels
You
and
can't
fake
know.
people out. Yeah, you couldn't stand by the table.
Right.
Guys wouldn't tell you what equipment they were using to make beats.
Wow.
They didn't want to tell you anything. They didn't want to tell you how to chop samples. They didn't want to tell you how to meet this person. It was very secretive.
Yeah.
And that was always weird to me. I'm like, why is everyone so secretive? And but it was such a small number of people. This is obviously before YouTube and
Right.
all the information is out there. And I always hated that. I was
Yeah.
like, yo, you guys, some of you guys are successful not because you're talented, but because you've cut off this knowledge from everybody else.
Right. You're
And
making
then
it exclusive. Yeah.
yeah, and then when the knowledge comes out, we're gonna see who's who,
Right.
because when everybody has the same information, then you'll be able to see who's who and who's truly got what it takes to be successful. And
Right.
so I started thinking to myself when I was podcasting, I always felt like I had nothing to say. People would ask me for years before I started, "You should podcast." I was like, I don't really have nothing to talk about. But then that whole conversation about people withholding information, artists emailing me regularly for advice. I said, you know what, this is the angle we should take, because we're still active artists. There are no active artists who are like doing this every week. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, if we do this every week, people can actually see us apply the things we talk about, and they can see, and we can have discussions about what works, what doesn't work, where we went wrong, how we're doing, so they can kind of see what's behind our success, and not just think, oh, you guys are just great artists, so it would work regardless.
Right.
And we started kind of pivot in that direction early on. And at first, people were kind of, they didn't know how they felt about it because they just wanted to hear us talk about hip hop every week. But to us, we're like, why do we talk about hip hop every week? We don't even do that amongst ourselves,
Right. There's
you
a
know?
whole industry behind. There's a whole business aspect of it, and
Exactly.
a whole lifestyle.
Yeah, people don't even know. I'm like, yo, there's the amount of time I get to actually work on music is less than 10% of my day.
Right.
You know, Like that.
Exactly.
And I'm a full-time artist, and I've been one for 19 years, and I still only get 10% of my day to work on the craft.
Right.
And so I was like, we should have a podcast that talks about everything else and actually helps artists get past these hurdles, like understand these situations, understand when they are hurting themselves,
Mhm.
and how to create more opportunities and more success. And we started pivoting that way, and the feedback we've got about the podcast is changing people's lives. Like some of the emails we get now are just so inspiring
Yeah.
because it's it's about hip hop, but it's also about becoming the best version of yourself.
Right. And to
And
know
I,
that you're not alone and like everybody's struggling with a lot of the same kind of things, but then also you can do this, you can make
yes,
this happen, you can work this out together. So I think
yes,
that's amazing.
yep, yep. And that's what made us start the podcast that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have like a million episodes on the podcast now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Because
fantastic.
we try to go every week. It's like one of those. It's like working out. If you skip a week and then you want to skip 2 weeks,
Great.
and then you skip two, you're like, I'll just get it next week. We're like, let's just do it every week, even when we don't feel like it.
Yeah.
We'll come up with something, and the times where we don't feel like doing it, end up being our best episodes.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And you've also shared a lot of your experiences in books too. So you've published 3 books
Four
and
now. Yep, four now.
toured. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've talked about because you toured for a while. So
Yes.
you've talked about your experiences on the road
Yep.
because being on the road is not exactly what people
No.
think it is. It's not all
No.
glamour all the time. It's
No.
mostly being stuck in a van with you know
Yeah.
a lot of smelly people and
Who
you
you
know
hopefully like.
right. Hopefully, yeah, yeah. You may not like at the end. So yeah,
No.
share
No.
that experience too. So that was a really fun book because sometimes it's not
Yeah.
this super glamorous lifestyle and things go wrong,
Yes.
and being honest about that it's not mistakes are going to be made, things
Mm-hmm.
problems are going to happen, and how you deal with them is really the learning experience. It's where the growth comes in. Is not what happened, but what you do afterwards.
Yes.
So
Yes.
can you share one example from that book? What's your favorite
Oh,
case
from that
study?
book? Oh
Yeah, from
man.
the
From that What a Night book, my favorite story in there is probably the time in Akron where we ended up performing in a strip club that we didn't know was a strip club. Because we were told it was closed. We were told it used to be a strip club.
right.
They said, hey, it used to be a strip club. They don't do that anymore. And they're rebranding and reopening, and you guys are going to be the first show. We said, all right, cool. And then we get there and sound check, and we're like, man, there's more women at the bar than usual. This
Sure
is,
seems like a strip club.
yeah, it's a little weird. They did have on clothes at the time, so we didn't know. We were like, oh, they're clothed. And then, as the evening went on and the DJ started spinning, and we started seeing people like be guys come in and, grab girls by the hand and go into private rooms that were like behind our merch table.
During the show, like,
We're like, this is a real strip club. This is, and then by 8:30, the girls who were fully dressed started kind of getting in their work clothes, if you will. And it was bad.
that was a memorable night then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. The crowd hated us. Our fans started arguing with the strip club fans. You know what I mean?
Right.
The guy who owned the club got on stage and just kind of took me aside and said, y'all need to start the show. When you gonna start the show? I said, this is the mother show.
Exactly. You hired us. This
This
is
is
what
it. Yeah, this is what we do.
that's hysterical. And like everybody was there not to see you.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Half of them. It was like almost a fight. Like the girls at the table were like, ugh, y'all suck. Get out of here. And our fans are like, shut up.
Right.
This
Oh
is
my God.
amazing. Go
And you
on.
just gotta roll with it and make the best of it and move on.
Yeah, that was a bad one. That was a bad one.
Yeah, but I think it's important to share those experiences. And then one of your other books is 10 Traits of Successful Hip Hop Artists. So
Yes.
taking a look at, the common traits between, the household names that we all know,
Mhm.
Kanye and 50 and Nipsey and all
Yep.
these people, like how did their career start? What were the things that really kind of changed things for them? And
Yep.
how can, just the average person apply that to their own music career? I think it's
Yeah.
important to, really magnify those things too and get an understanding that this is difficult, but it's not rocket science, and anybody can do this with the right tools and the right time and the right experiences. So really boiling down that into more manageable terms, I think is really a huge public service for emerging artists as well. So
Yeah,
I
thank
love
you.
that you know that's a common thread in just everything that you do, and I'm glad that it's that everybody's so receptive to it because it's really important to talk about this stuff together and learn about the music industry as independent artists together because you know the it's still kind of like that. It's still kind of like, you know, the big labels kind of control things. These big labels still have like, you know, they're not showing you the album that they're playing. They won't tell you how they're doing it, that you can't see
Right.
behind the curtain. But we can figure this out together and we can
Yeah.
be all better artists together. So I think that's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, that was a large reason why I wrote the book, was to kind of tell those stories that aren't told,
Yeah.
just to really combat like the myth of like overnight success. You
Yeah.
know, that quote, they said, yeah, you know, uh, success happened overnight, but it took 10 years to like, you know what I mean? Like
For
it
sure.
really, it took 10 years for somebody to think it was overnight success.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories in my book kind of illustrate that. They talk about things that guys are doing and have been doing and people have artists been doing that no one really thought about at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They just thought it organically just happened for this person because they were great. And it's like,
Right.
well, did you see all the times this person failed and kept going? Did you see all the times that they were rejected? Or do you know how many hours that person writes every day? And how many songs they record every year? People weren't telling those stories. I thought, man, it's good. We should have a hip hop version of a book that goes into that. You know, they do it for other genres, for the business world. You hear these stories, but I was like, we need this for hip hop. So I tried to write the book for hip hop.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics is, you know, what went wrong? You know, where were the mistakes that were made so that other people can try to avoid it and you
Yes,
know, build on your own success from there. That's
yes.
incredible. So let's talk a little bit about more about the beat making stuff. So obviously you use your own beats and your own music and the artists that you work with, but beat making can be an asset for you too. It can be intellectual property that you can exploit, that you can sell. So you sell your beats also.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
So
Yeah.
how did you get into doing that? And what advice would you have for somebody that's trying to get into beat making and selling beats?
Uh, man, a lot of the beat making and selling beats is kind of, when I first started looking at it, it was kind of emerging. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it wasn't fully formed. Um, Guys were not really sharing a lot of tools. There wasn't just like a whole platforms dedicated to it like
Yeah.
there are now that have emerged in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think that it's such a different thing. And I haven't even taken that step. I do think that for people who want to get into selling beats, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to be consistent. You know, you have to be consistent about your working, your creativity as if it's your job before it even becomes your job.
Right.
And what I think some people do, they make a good beat. They may not make anything else for a couple weeks. And when they feel it, they work. They work based on inspiration, not based on discipline.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at these producers who are able to make a living off of production, what they're doing is they're getting up and they're working on their production as if it was their 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
You know, they all have extremely high outputs. They, hey, I made 6 beats today. I made 5 beats today. And we all know if you make 5 beats today, all of them aren't going to be great.
Right.
But as you mentioned, they're all intellectual property,
Mm-hmm.
which may at some point come back and earn you money.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of beat making. It can turn into a form of passive income
Mm-hmm.
for artists should they get their catalog out there and they become successful. Another thing I think is beautiful about selling beats now, the industry, is that when I first started making beats, it was all about getting your beats on someone else's album.
Mm-hmm.
You had to constantly pitch yourself to
Right.
other artists. Okay, I got to go here. I got to meet his manager. I got to make sure I got the CD or beat tape on me. And I got to make sure that everything here is perfect and fits him. It's like, that's not exactly how it works anymore.
Yeah.
Now you have entire platforms where artists can go look for the style that they want, and they negotiate on those platforms the terms, or they go look for you because you do a specific style and your brand is so strong.
Right.
But the point where all producers can't be heard anymore unless they get a big placement, those days are done. You have and in addition to that part of it, you have an entire segment of producers who are instrumentalists, who all they do is sell their beats as instrumental compositions with
Yeah.
no desire to work with vocalists.
Right.
And those guys are getting millions of plays on Spotify without some of them, and some of them don't even play shows. A lot of them. You look
Right.
at some of those lo-fi playlists, guys are getting millions of plays every month. No one knows what they look like.
Which is good because sometimes some people don't want, the
Yeah,
spotlight. They just want to do this part of it, which is great
yeah,
too. So
yeah,
yeah, there's
yeah,
room for everybody
yeah.
for
It's a
that.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. And the thing about the beat licenses too, it's important to not use samples
Yes.
in music. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, yeah. I've had like and I tell artists this now because I started my career out. I'm heavily into records and digging, as I mentioned, and that can be successful within a certain segment. But if you're not clearing samples, you're going to have some limited opportunities in terms of licensing
Right.
your music on larger platforms and to larger entities. And that's something that has definitely plagued me in the past. I mean, we've been Soul Position, me and RJD2, we've been sued over samples before,
Yeah.
um, and it sucks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily make me stop sampling, but what it did make me do is make sure I have a body of work that's significant that doesn't have samples in it.
Right. And you know
And
that anything that has a sample in it, you're going to be a little bit limited in what you can do with it more than likely. And
yes,
clearing samples is not for independent artists. It's probably never going to happen. And, it's hard
no,
to get those samples cleared unless you're
yeah,
a huge label. They just don't do it for independent artists. So you kind of have to, manage your risk there. And the way that technology has advanced, they can pick up on the samples like the
yes,
second you upload it, they're like ding ding ding
yep,
sample. So yeah, they know it's there. So you're not likely to get away with it.
no, no,
You're not. That doesn't necessarily mean that your music's going to get taken down or you're going to get sued, but you're
right,
going to be really limited in what you can do with it as far as the opportunities that you can take later. So I think it's important, it's worth it to put the time and the effort into creating your own beats to use,
yes,
or legally buying samples from somebody else to be used. And the
yep,
sample sites, they've got a couple of different licenses there, right? So you could have like an
hmm,
exclusive license or a non-exclusive license for beats. So that means that the beats can be used in several different songs, or if somebody wants exclusive use of it, that's a higher price point for you.
correct,
Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
correct.
So you've got different options there as far as, sharing beats publicly and legally and making money off of them.
Yeah, yeah, and encourage all artists, like, no matter where you come from, like I come from, excuse me, I almost had to sneeze, from the sample based world, but I
Mm-hmm.
tell all guys who come from like my path of making beats with samples and records, learn how to compose well enough to articulate your ideas,
Mm-hmm.
because you never know which ideas of yours may take off. You may have something that has no samples in it that you might not think is great because it doesn't sound like these amazing musicians you sample, but it may be great. It may be just what someone's looking for.
Yeah.
Uh, um, and so don't underestimate like the importance of just learning basic music theory. Learn how to, and I still can't read music, but I understand chords. I
Mm-hmm.
understand melody. I know how to, if I have something that's in my head, I know how to to make a beat with that melody. I know how to articulate my ideas and execute them. And like you're saying, so many more doors will open when you're able to do that. I mean, there's whole production camps now that all they do is just create samples for producers to use now,
Mm-hmm.
and you just work out a deal with them for the writing portion of that composition that you create with it, right? But you can do the same thing.
Right.
If you're a producer, you can hire musicians, you can create your own sample packs, and you can sample yourself. Whatever creates the most opportunities, you should have things that go down each, that can go in each path. And I think the
Right.
more doors, the better.
Yeah. And I think it's taking that time to really experiment and try to find your own sound too, and really
Mm-hmm.
develop what it is that you're really good at and what sets you apart from other people. I think that's important to have your own identity, because
Yes.
you're the only person that can sound like you. So, go all in on that, identify what that is to you, and just keep kind of building on that. And opportunities will come to you because they like your sound.
Yes.
And I think also too, the way that technology has also evolved is that it's easier for people to do this at home. To You don't necessarily have to go in the studio to do this. you can buy the tools that you can make your beats at home. You can, create really well produced things in your living room.
Yes, 100%. Like when I first started, and what we didn't talk about, but I'm sure you remember the era. Like I got my first sampler in 1996.
Mhm.
Um, there were no software programs to make beats back then.
Right.
If you made beats in the mid to late 90s, you had to buy physical pieces of gear that cost $2,000,
Right.
$3,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now it's like you're saying, you can just get a program, a couple programs that are cheap, the free versions of them, and you can do a lot with a little, with just a laptop
Yeah.
and a nice pair of headphones. You have more, and you have more processing power than everybody in the 90s had.
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
And
Like,
so take advantage of it. Be as
yeah.
mobile as possible. Learn as much about music as possible. If you hear something, train your ear to be able to recognize a great melody. Train your ear to be able to hear something and kind of play the main parts of it. Like, oh, this is the melody they're playing. This is the main chord. Okay, I want to do something that feels like that.
Right.
It's not that, but that's a whole industry in and of itself. There's guys, as you know, in the industry, all their job is to replay samples so they don't sound like the original.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many ways to make money as a producer, but you have to make sure you put the time into the craft.
Absolutely. And just have fun with it too. I think,
Yes.
look at it as experimenting.
Yes.
There's no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. Figure out your own path and just have fun with it.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool. What is upcoming for you? So obviously this past year has been a little bit weird.
Yeah.
So what do you have coming up next?
Yeah. Yeah. The next thing I'm going to put out, I've got a book I'm going to release next month. It's called The Social Media Cheat Code.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I know
so
that's something a lot of people struggle with. So yeah, I'm excited to read that.
Yeah, and so it's for just like principles to help artists with social media.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something that we did an episode about it like 2 years ago, and it was kind of abbreviated. And at that time, I was like, I should make this a book because there's so many things that don't get covered and that artists do wrong on social media that they may not even know.
Yeah.
And so that book, I'm pretty much done. I'm just proofreading it right now.
That's
And
amazing. That was time well spent.
yeah, that's all I've been doing during COVID, just writing books.
That's great.
Not that much. I can't tour, so it's
Right,
like,
exactly. You gotta
let's,
do a solitary kind of thing. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that'll hopefully be out next month. And then I think after that, I'm going to start getting back to music. I got a record that I finished. I was actually like a mini artist. I was actually going to tour in 2020
Yeah.
and was planning a tour, had it routed and everything as of like February, March 2020. And then COVID hit and that whole fall just got kind of destroyed. So I have an album that I was going to release then that I'm probably going to release this summer. And back to music, and I'm still going to keep doing more books, and I'll hopefully to do some like online courses as well for
That's
artists.
great. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and sharing it not with just me, but with everybody, with making that a goal of your books and your podcast and just helping and
Yeah,
helping guide because this is not easy for a lot of people, but we can do this together.
yeah. Well, thank you, thank you.